Sometimes in life, the very thing we run from is the very thing our soul cries for once it's gone. An avoidant pushes away the one who loved them deeply, not because that love wasn't enough, but because it was too much for a heart that wasn't ready to receive it. And here's the irony, the very devotion they rejected becomes the H they carry when silence replaces presence. You see, when someone gives you their full heart, when they fight for you, when they show up no matter how messy life gets, that becomes a standard. Even if you try to dismiss it, even if you convince yourself you don't need it, your spirit knows the truth. It remembers what it felt like to be deeply seen, even when you couldn't see yourself. That's why avoidants miss the anxious ex. Because once the storm settles, they look around and realize the energy that filled the room, the warmth that held their chaos together, is gone. And suddenly, the silence is louder than the arguments ever were. The absence is heavier than the weight of closeness they once feared. But here's where the power lies, and this is what I want you to take with you today. Being missed does not mean you belong back where you were broken. Just because someone recognizes your value in hindsight does not mean they know how to honor it in reality. Missing you is their lesson. Moving forward with strength is yours. Life has a way of showing people the truth when it's too late. But you don't have to wait around to be someone's realization. You are not here to be someone's regret. You are here to be someone's miracle. And the right person, the one who has done the work, the one who has healed enough to hold what you offer, won't push it away. They will rise to meet it. They will guard it. They will never have to lose you to know what they have. So if you've ever been rejected by someone who now misses you, let that be confirmation. Not that you should turn back, but that you carried a light so bright it left an imprint on a heart that tried to shut you out. Keep that light, walk forward with it, because the love you gave that felt wasted was never wasted. It was a seed, and in the right soil, with the right soul, it will flourish into something unshakable, undeniable, and eternal. When space enters a relationship, it has a way of revealing truths that closeness can sometimes blur. In the moment of rejection, when an avoidant pushes away someone who loves them deeply, it may feel as though they are firm, certain, and resolved in their choice. But distance has a language of its own. Space exposes what presence was covering. It is in the quiet after the storm that a person begins to realize what they once had. For the avoidant, closeness often feels suffocating. They crave independence, they prize their solitude, and they fear losing themselves in the pull of intimacy. So when they are met with the consistent affection of someone who leans in, someone who desires connection, reassurance, and depth, they interpret it as pressure. The anxious partner's love feels like demand, when in truth it is devotion. The avoidant recoils not necessarily from the person, but from the weight of their own unhealed fears. They step back, convinced that they need space to breathe. But here's the paradox that very space, once gained, becomes the teacher. When the constant texts stop arriving, when the gentle reminders of care no longer fill their day, when the warmth of presence is replaced with silence, they suddenly notice what was once dismissed. Clarity doesn't always come in the middle of connection. Often it comes in its absence. What felt like suffocation begins to look like safety. What was labeled as pressure begins to feel like passion. The heart recognizes what the mind rejected. Space strips away the noise of conflict, the push and pull of opposing attachment needs. In that stripped down stillness, the avoidant no longer sees neediness or clinginess. They begin to see loyalty. They begin to see commitment. They begin to see someone who, despite their flaws, offered a love that was steadfast. And the contrast between presence and absence speaks louder than words ever could. Without space, they might never have known. It is easy to dismiss value when it is always available. A glass of water doesn't seem extraordinary until you've gone a day in the desert. Love doesn't feel rare when it is consistently knocking at your door, asking to be let in. But once it's gone, the avoidant finds themselves walking through that desert of silence, realizing the oasis they turned away from wasn't a mirage, it was real. And in that realization, clarity blooms. They remember the little things they once brushed aside. The anxious partner's check in after a long day, which once felt overbearing, now feels like a rare act of care. The constant reminders of love, which once seemed unnecessary, now echo as a gift they didn't know how to receive. The presence that felt heavy now feels like a light they cannot find anywhere else. Space creates a mirror. It reflects back to the avoidant not just what they lost, but also why they ran. They begin to see that the issue was not the anxious partner's devotion, but their own inability to hold it. They miss the security that came with being someone's priority, even if at the time it felt uncomfortable. They miss being chosen relentlessly. They miss the anchor they once called a burden. And it is only in the silence, when the anxious partner has walked away, that they can finally hear their own longing. That longing does not come immediately. It comes slowly, creeping in during moments of solitude, when they expect to find peace in their freedom, but instead feel the weight of emptiness. Space turns freedom into loneliness, and in that loneliness, clarity emerges. They begin to understand that love is not something to escape from, but something to grow into. The anxious partner has a way of showing up with a kind of presence that is rare. It's not just about physical closeness or being in the same room. It's about the depth of their attention, the intensity of their care, the way they seem to lean into the relationship with their whole being. They notice the little things. They listen not just to the words spoken, but to the emotions underneath them. They remember the details. They anticipate needs. They offer comfort before it is asked for. And in the moment, an avoidant often doesn't see this for what it is. They misinterpret it as too much, as overwhelming, as something that will trap them. But when that presence disappears, when the energy that once surrounded them is withdrawn, its absence is undeniable. The anxious partner doesn't love halfway. Their attachment makes them hyper-aware of shifts, of moods, of silences. They're often attuned to the emotional currents in the relationship in a way that others are not. That can feel like a burden to the one who isn't ready to meet that intensity because it exposes things they'd rather hide. But what's actually happening is that the anxious partner is giving a gift. An unwavering reminder that someone is paying attention, someone cares enough to notice, someone is willing to fight for closeness even when it's uncomfortable. That presence is not just physical companionship, it's a sense of emotional security, of never being forgotten, of never being invisible. When the avoidant steps back and creates distance, they tell themselves they need space to breathe. They convince themselves that the constant reaching out was suffocating, that the care felt like control, that the devotion felt like demand. But space has a way of amplifying what once felt invisible. And in the quiet that follows separation, the avoidant realizes how much of their daily rhythm was wrapped in the anxious partner's presence. The text that checked in during the afternoon, the phone call that ended the night, the way they were remembered in small gestures, a favorite snack, a word of encouragement, a look that said, "I see you." Those threads of attention and care weave into a tapestry, and once it is pulled away, the emptiness feels vast. That's when they begin to miss it, because no one else quite embodies that level of devotion. Casual connections, fleeting flings, surface-level conversations, they don't replicate the feeling of someone who was fully invested, who cared enough to notice everything. The anxious partner carried a depth that others may not offer. And once it's gone, the avoidant starts to feel the contrast. They begin to realize that what they once dismissed as too much was, in fact, the kind of love that anchored them. Presence is not about perfection. The anxious partner may have expressed it in ways that weren't always graceful, sometimes with fear, sometimes with insecurity, sometimes with intensity that was hard to handle, but beneath that was something unshakable, the willingness to remain engaged, that willingness to hold on, to keep showing up, to stay connected even when things were hard is what sets them apart. And when that is gone, when they finally stop calling, stop reaching out, stop showing up, the absence echoes. The avoidant begins to notice the void. They notice it in the silence at night when there's no one to ask how their day was. They notice it in the small victories when there's no one to celebrate with. They notice it in the struggles when there's no one to lean on, even if they once resisted leaning. They notice it in the lack of reminders that they matter, that they're loved, that someone is thinking of them. That kind of presence, once gone, leaves a mark. And so they miss it, not just the person, but the feeling of being cared for so completely. They miss the security of knowing they were someone's priority. They miss the consistency of love that never questioned whether they were worth it. And what was once misjudged as neediness becomes recognized in hindsight as a rare kind of devotion, the kind that doesn't show up every day, the kind that, once lost, is not easily replaced. Rejection has a way of convincing someone that they are not valuable, when in truth rejection often says more about the one giving it than the one receiving it. When the avoidant pushes away the anxious partner, it can look final, it can sound definitive. The anxious partner who gave their all may walk away carrying the belief that their love was too much, that their consistency was a burden, that their desire for closeness was a flaw. But time has a way of correcting illusions. What rejection cannot do is erase the truth of someone's worth. Value is not diminished just because it goes unrecognized. A diamond buried in the ground doesn't lose its brilliance because no one is looking at it. Love that is steady, loyal, and unwavering doesn't stop being precious just because someone failed to hold it. For the avoidant, rejection often feels like relief at first. They believe they have regained freedom, that they have escaped pressure, that they can finally breathe. But eventually, when they are left with their own silence, they begin to remember. They recall the loyalty they once dismissed. They remember the constant reassurance they once resented. They feel the absence of the safety net they pushed away, and suddenly what once felt suffocating begins to feel irreplaceable. The heart has a way of keeping score in deeper ways than the mind acknowledges. An avoidant may convince themselves that they did not need the anxious partner, that they could live without that intensity, that independence was more important than connection. But as days turn into weeks, and weeks into months, the reality begins to emerge. The anxious partner was not just filling space, they were filling a void. They were providing the emotional nourishment that the avoidant couldn't admit they craved. And though they were rejected, their value echoes in the emptiness left behind. This is why avoidants often find themselves missing the very people they once turned away. They begin to realize that rejection was not an accurate measure of worth. It was a reflection of their own inability to receive, their own fear of intimacy, their own discomfort with vulnerability. The anxious partner's value does not decrease simply because it wasn't embraced. In fact, the contrast of life without them makes their worth stand out even more. The late night calls that once felt intrusive now become longed for connections. The persistence that once felt overwhelming now looks like faithfulness. The love that was pushed away now shines in memory as something rare and beautiful. And this is where the paradox lies. Rejection often plants seeds of doubt in the one who was left behind, but it plants seeds of recognition in the one who did the leaving. The anxious partner may question their value, but the avoidant begins to recognize it too late. The distance becomes the canvas where value is finally painted clearly, because when someone who was once always there is gone, it forces the avoidant to confront what they lost. And they often come to see that they didn't push away someone who was unworthy. They pushed away someone whose love was a treasure. The truth is, love doesn't lose its significance because it went unappreciated. A song is still beautiful even if no one is listening. The anxious partner's devotion still carries weight even if it wasn't received. And when the avoidant finally feels the sting of absence, they are reminded of what their heart already knew. Rejection doesn't erase value, it only delays recognition. Their missing is not proof that the anxious partner should return, but it is proof that their love mattered, that it left an imprint, that it carried a power no act of rejection could diminish. The anxious partner often becomes a mirror for the avoidant, reflecting back to them parts of themselves they have not yet faced or learned to embrace. When someone loves you with relentless devotion, they are not just giving you affection, they are showing you pieces of your own humanity. For the avoidant, this can be overwhelming because deep down they may struggle to accept love, to believe they are worthy of it, or to hold space for intimacy without fear. So when the anxious partner shows them unconditional care, it forces them to see qualities they may not feel ready to acknowledge. Their own vulnerability, their own need for connection, their own longing to be chosen. This kind of love is unsettling because it touches wounds that the avoidant has worked hard to cover. The anxious partner's desire for closeness, for reassurance, for affirmation shines a light on the avoidant's discomfort with intimacy. And in that light, the avoidant begins to feel exposed. They see how much they secretly crave the very things they push away. They realize, even if they can't say it, that being someone's safe place and being held in safety is something they want, but it terrifies them. So their instinct is to reject the mirror, to push away the anxious partner, to silence the reflection. But no amount of rejection can erase the truth that was shown to them. When the anxious partner is gone, the avoidant still carries the imprint of that mirror. They remember the way they were seen so completely, even in their flaws. They remember how someone cared for them in moments when they didn't even care for themselves. They remember how the anxious partners stayed present even when they were distant, how they held on when things got difficult, how they loved without conditions. And in the silence of absence, those memories echo louder. The avoidant begins to miss not just the presence of the anxious partner, but the reflection of love they provided, a reflection that showed them they were worth something even when they couldn't see it. Unconditional care has a way of leaving a mark on the soul. When someone consistently shows up with love, it becomes part of your story. Even if you reject it, even if you walk away, your heart remembers how it felt. The avoidant, who once ran from the intensity, starts to feel the loss of that mirror. They realize that the anxious partner didn't just give love, they revealed love's possibility. They reminded them of what it felt like to be chosen without hesitation, to be valued without having to earn it, to be seen beyond the walls they built. And though it was too much to hold at the time, in hindsight it becomes the very thing they long for. The avoidant misses the mirror because no one else reflects them back in the same way. Casual connections cannot recreate that depth. Surface-level relationships do not expose the same truth. Temporary flings cannot provide the same kind of devotion. What they come to realize is that the anxious partner's care was not ordinary. It was a mirror of unconditional love that challenged them to see themselves differently. It showed them the possibility of intimacy they were too afraid to accept, and when that mirror is gone, they are left with an emptiness that no distraction can fill. And so they miss not only the person, but the version of themselves that was revealed through that love. The anxious partner reminded them of their capacity to be loved and to love in return. Losing that reflection creates a void, because deep down, they know that what they rejected was not just another person. It was the part of themselves that longed to be embraced. Absence has a way of speaking louder than presence ever could. When the anxious partner finally steps back, when their calls no longer come, when their words of reassurance are no longer heard, the avoidant is left with a silence that does not soothe, it stings. At first, this absence feels like relief. They convince themselves that the pressure is gone, that the space is freedom, that solitude is what they wanted all along. But as days turn into nights, and nights stretch into weeks, the relief begins to wear off, and what settles in is an undeniable awareness something is missing. The anxious partner filled a space in their life they never acknowledged until it was empty. They brought a warmth, a rhythm, a connection that created meaning in ordinary days. Their devotion became a constant background melody, so steady that the avoidant often forgot it was playing. But once that music stops, the quiet is deafening. The absence highlights every moment of connection that is no longer there. The good morning messages, the check-ins during the day, the I love, used before sleep. These simple acts, once dismissed as excessive or unnecessary, now echo as signs of love that the avoidant struggles to replace. Awareness doesn't always strike like lightning, it often creeps in slowly. It shows up in the empty space on the couch, in the uncelebrated milestones, in the silence after a hard day when no one asks how they're doing. It creeps in when they remember the way the anxious partner's laughter filled the room, or the way they always cared enough to notice the small things. The avoidant begins to feel the difference between solitude and loneliness. Solitude once felt safe, like a shield from intimacy. But loneliness is different. It is the absence of being truly known. And in that emptiness, they realize what they pushed away. Time apart has a way of sharpening memory. The avoidant starts to replay moments they once dismissed. They remember how the anxious partner stood by them in difficult times, how they remained present through arguments, how they loved through imperfections. They remember how much effort was poured into the relationship, effort they didn't know how to receive at the time. And the more they reflect, the more they realize that what they called neediness was actually dedication, what they labeled as clinginess was loyalty, and what they thought was pressure was, in reality, passion. This is why absence becomes such a powerful teacher. It pulls back the curtain and shows the truth that was hidden by fear and resistance. It allows the avoidant to feel, in the starkest way, the difference between life with love and life without it. And no matter how much they try to distract themselves, no matter how many ways they try to fill the void, the awareness lingers. They begin to recognize that they weren't suffocating from someone else's presence. They were suffocating from their own inability to receive it. Awareness comes in waves. Sometimes it crashes hard, like when they see a reminder of the anxious partner and feel the weight of what they lost all at once. Other times it drifts in quietly, a dull ache in the background of their day. But whether it arrives in a rush or in silence, it does its work. The avoidant cannot ignore the fact that absence has revealed the truth. The anxious partner's love was not ordinary. And losing it has left a hole they cannot easily fill. And so they begin to miss not just the relationship, but the sense of being loved so completely, so persistently, so faithfully. Absence awakens awareness, and awareness creates longing. The very love they once rejected becomes the love they now crave, not because it changed, but because distance has revealed it for what it always was. And so, if there is one truth I want you to carry from this, it is this: being missed is not a call to go back. It is a reminder of the light you carried, the love you gave, the presence that was unforgettable. The fact that they now feel your absence only proves that what you offered had weight, had meaning, had power. But don't confuse their awareness with your direction. Their lesson is that they lost something rare. Your lesson is that you are something rare. You do not need to wait for someone to recognize your worth in hindsight. You do not need to shrink yourself so you are easier to hold. You do not need to return to places where your heart was overlooked. What you gave was not wasted. It was proof of who you are. And the right person, the one who has the courage to meet you fully, will see your value in the moment, not in your absence. So stand tall in what you carry. Honor the love within you. Do not let rejection rewrite your worth. What you gave was extraordinary, and extraordinary is exactly what you deserve in return. Thank you for allowing me to share this with you. Thank you for your open heart, your willingness to listen, and your courage to grow. Remember this: you are not someone's regret. You are someone's answered prayer. Walk forward with that truth, and may your steps be filled with purpose, strength, and unshakable love. Goodbye for now, and thank you.